Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. December 17, 2025. Breaking news. Ultimatum. Maduro, lever war, and also the impact of events in the Caribbean Sea on the Middle East and Ukraine. A $50 million bounty has been placed on Maduro's head, and his country has been labeled an international terrorist. Drug trafficking has been stopped. Trump is giving an ultimatum speech tonight at 9 p.m. in Washington in the hope that after it, Maduro will resign. Our military intelligence reports that Maduro's inner circle is putting pressure on him to step down. The fleet, which Trump called the Armada, is completely blocking all sea routes to Venezuela. No oil, no soldiers, no weapons from North Korea, China, or Russia, ours, can enter the country. Our attack on Venezuela, if it happens, could completely change all relations between the world's leading powers. We will talk a bit later about how this will affect Israel and Ukraine. The White House officially announced that it's Caracas, so it's Caracas. They announced that the United States wants Maduro, his family, and his closest associates to leave the country and hand over power to the legitimately elected president. So we just stole the future vice president from Venezuela and took her away to the Nobel Prize ceremony. Basically, the whole Make America Great Again movement supports the president, you could say, and the Republican Party, too. But there are many who believe that the United States should not interfere in the affairs and conflicts of other countries. By the way, the president was unexpectedly supported by Senator Zenachit the Ruffin from the Democrats, who said today that he listened to and reviewed the information and fully supports the president's actions regarding Maduro in Venezuela. The well-known blogger Tucker Carlson, whom you also know, made an appeal not to take military action to stop it. He believes that the regime changes over the past 80 years that America has tried to carry out have never led to good results. He says, I can't predict anything, but unfortunately we have a huge and very negative experience with regime changes. That is, when the United States invaded somewhere, things in those countries got worse than they were before. Well, for example, the famous story with Iran when, without invading, they still forced the army to hand over the Shah in disgrace. And what happened with Khomeini? To explain the position of Trump and the White House, I have to say that American companies have been working in Venezuela for many years, developing oil, refining it, selling it, and everything else. And the country of Venezuela received the agreed share of the profits for that. It was fully proportional to what Norway or other countries received there. When someone extracts and processes oil on their territory, they receive billions. Basically, they get money for almost nothing, just because they happen to be born on an oil field at a certain point. The government, meaning, was collectivist. The man's name was Hugo Chavez. She promised the people so much in exchange for their votes in the elections that the money they got from the Americans was no longer enough. So that means Hugo Chavez. He decided to nationalize the oil developments and factories, taking them away from American companies, thinking that now they would get not just a part, but all of the profits. But it turned out that governments don't know how to extract and process oil, and things, as they say, went sideways. The oil revenues became not even half of what they used to be, but just significantly less. All 100 turned out to be much less than what half of them used to be. The people rebelled because they weren't getting what they were promised, but they were quickly subdued by the usual methods: weapons in the camp, kidnapping, murder. As usual, the country became completely impoverished. When the next gang came, now just a drug cartel, they threw a huge number of people out of their jobs and homes, deprived them of food and social medical care. And with the money left from oil and drug sales, they built communism within their own circle. But let's go back to the statement already made by Trump. He published it as a preamble to what he would say in the evening on his social network. Here's what Trump said. Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. They will be surrounded. They will be surrounded. They are surrounded. They will not return to the United States of America our oil, the land we bought from them, and other means of production they stole from us. The illegitimate Maduro regime, in fact, he wasn't elected, he just seized power. The authorities use oil from the stolen oil fields to finance themselves. Drugs, terrorism, murders, and so on. What they did led us to designate the Maduro regime as a foreign terrorist organization. Everything they stole from us must be returned immediately. Immediately! Exclamation mark. That's an understandable statement. The question is, will the Russians come here? What about China, which has a lot of interests in Venezuela? But how will they be able to do that if we've surrounded Venezuela, cut it off from the outside world? Well, what if a Russian or a Chinese ship comes along? Are we going to detain it? And if they don't stop, are we going to shoot at it? All right, then, let's get started. Probably Trump will explain this to us during his speech, and I'll tell you separately later what he explained. But let's turn to what we've already talked about several times, namely the Trump Doctrine. We've already discussed it. Its essence is as follows. If the actions of other countries directly affect or threaten our interests, then it becomes our business. Well, for example, let's look at Maduro. It's exactly like that. It's not our concern that he's a socialist. There are many worldwide. It's also not our concern if he stole the elections. That's for his country's citizens to address. So what is our business then? Well, first, Venezuela nationalized, that is to put it plainly, stole the factories we built and the oil fields we developed. Second, our other business is that Venezuela brings drugs into our country, and also that Venezuela kicked us out of their country. COM. Not to be killed, you can kill at Dorozhky's house. And you should. The doctrine also says that we will begin to reduce our presence in the Middle East and in Europe. I think that Israel is already standing firmly on its feet politically, economically, and militarily. In addition, developments like the Abraham Accords and ties with the Sunnis will help Israel make agreements with those very Sunnis. Perhaps the Jewish state will actually benefit from a more independent policy that will be focused on the needs and connections in the region. For the past 80 years, America has been protecting the whole world, intervening in other people's conflicts, and actually supporting millions of its own citizens at home. Well, some of them were working, some were partially working, some were not working at all. And in fact, the country was borrowing huge amounts of money to maintain the standard of living for those who couldn't provide for themselves. But many countries, just like people, got used to the idea that there was someone who could rush in at any moment and help them out, whether militarily or financially. How will our actions in the Caribbean Sea and our doctrine affect Ukraine? Well, let's imagine that this is the last chance right now to talk to Russia together with the United States. I mean, Europe, Ukraine, and the United States negotiating with Russia. So, Ukraine is told that if they don't come up with a joint settlement plan that the United States approves and passes on to Putin, then they, Ukraine, and probably Europe, will have to fight and negotiate on their own without us. Ukraine asked for guarantees of protection in case of another Russian attack. Trump said he agrees, but it's not very clear what that means. Maybe he agrees to something, maybe something else. Over there in Ukraine, they don't understand what he really means. If this means de facto acceptance of Ukraine into NATO without formal admission to NATO, then somehow that seems strange to me. Maybe it's a temporary guarantee, say for 5 years, but honestly, I don't believe in 10 years, since that would basically mean de facto acceptance into NATO. Well, okay, we don't know the details yet because nobody knows them. To be clear, there's no agreement with Russia yet, so what's all this? What we're discussing right now is just an attempt to develop a common position between the United States, Europe, and Ukraine. Zelensky explained what a common position means. Up to 90, all the agreements have already been reached, but I strongly suspect that 89 of them were reached a long time ago. The remaining 10 are exactly where the problem lies. Namely, Russia wants the entire Donbass and is not going to stop the war unless it gets what it wants. It has conquered part of it not yet, but it plans to keep conquering, while Ukraine doesn't want to give up an inch, but perhaps consciously, realizing that Trump is seriously leaving the European continent and will no longer protect everyone. It will lead to a cold shower for Ukrainians and Europeans, and they will suddenly realize the reality of the situation they are in. For Russia, as of today, from what we know, yes, there is no reason to end the war if Russia does not achieve what it wants. If I don't return victorious, it's better not to return at all. What Russia says doesn't always mean that's what it wants. But the war in Ukraine, from Russia's point of view, was supposed to get some sort of reward or something similar. They wanted to achieve some victories, and even more than what they already have. And they intend to get these victories either by continuing to fight. Russia has caused a major scandal because it hasn't defeated its opponent after 3.5 years. I think its population is 4 times smaller and its industry 10 times smaller. If a compromise is not reached at these negotiations now between the United States, and by compromise, I mean a solution, so to speak. So now we are going to Russia with a general plan, and we will talk with them. Then Russia will, of course, intensify its strikes, and the territory will slowly and with huge losses shift from Ukraine to Russia. Not a single European country will send its soldiers to the front, and those soldiers themselves won't go. They'll rebel. That's not what they're called for. And it will turn out that they will probably refuse to follow their government's orders. That's how I imagine it. They might still go as peacekeepers, like, we're just standing here, but if there's a war, we'll run away immediately. But as for actually taking part in anything, it's unlikely they'll do anything. I always see how unjustified they are. The hopes of Ukrainians, as well as the Ukrainian leadership's fear of criminal exposure, prevent them from cutting off what needs to be cut off and keeping their statehood and independence. When there's gangrene, well, what can you do? They cut off the leg. I don't know how the Ukrainian people will perceive what's happening. It's possible that if they give Russia what Russia demands, the Ukrainian people will see it as a defeat and capitulation. But at the moment, Ukraine can't take back from Russia or even defend what Russia wants on its own. Exactly, I suspect that even with Europe's help, Ukraine can't succeed without America. These facts could eventually lead to Ukraine losing its independence. So what I want to say is, if we don't take these facts into account, thank you. This could possibly lead to Ukraine losing its independence and statehood. Well, it's possible that a certain part of Ukraine, called the western part, might break away and either become a small independent state or find someone to join, maybe Poland, maybe someone else. In any case, the situation looks like Kiev's last chance to preserve its people and its state. And I really hope that I'm wrong. I really hope that I'm wrong. And today, a little later, we will listen to President Trump and also learn the reaction of Venezuela and other players who have ties with Venezuela and would not want to lose them. That's all for now. I will definitely tell you what happened during the speech and after it until our next meetings. To be continued. There's no way to turn it off. Wow.